This program, of course, is presented by Pro Wrestling Illustrated, the most widely read, widely sold, and respected wrestling magazine in the world today.
All right, this is the Pro Wrestling Illustrated Podcast. I'm your host, PWI senior writer Al Castle, joined as always by my co-host, Brian Solomon. How's it going?
Going great, Al. Hope it's going okay with you too.
Yes, a very busy week, and we were joined by somebody I've been seeing a lot of over the last 24 hours, Candace Cordelia, PWI contributing writer. How are you?
I'm good. I'm exhausted, but we're chugging along.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, a crazy week because it is PWI 500 week. Candace and I were on Busted Open on SiriusXM yesterday, revealing the news of the top 10. Word's out by now. Seth Rollins for the third time, the number one ranked wrestler in the PWI 500. We will break down the 500 more than just kind of counting down. We'll try to dig a little deeper, talk some analysis of the list. Some already notable, I guess, mistakes that we've caught. That's always, that those first 24 hours after the magazine comes out can be so harrowing because, you get, there's always some hate, there's always some love, but I think the toughest part is those realizations of like, oh no, did we really do that? And 500 entries in the list, it's bound to happen. So we'll talk about that and give our apologies and all that in a moment. First, let's get out of the way how you can go ahead and get the PWI 500. Go to PWI-online.com. You could download it right now, be digging through it, the digital edition, all 500 entries. I think there's 16 extra pages in this magazine, more than just a list of names and bios, tons of analysis from the PWI team. This is about the biggest project that we do every year. We take it super seriously. And I'm sure you can go online and see all 500 names right now. But I think you'd be doing yourself a disservice. You really want to dig into our work and see how we put this together and see all this analysis, really dig in. Go to PWI-online.com. Download it right now, and you can get a bundle package, or you could be reading the issue right now digitally, and also have it mailed. The print copy, have it in your mailbox in a couple of weeks. And obviously, you could get the one issue, but it makes a lot more sense to subscribe. Get lots of savings over the cover price. We're now in kind of ranking season. We're already at work at what is now the women's 250. I feel like every year it grows a little bit. And after that, we've got the tag team list, and then we've got the year-end awards. So we're very much in the busy season now. Don't miss an issue. Go to PWI-online.com. So the world's heard from Candace and I about the 500. Brian, let's get your take now that the cat is out of the bag. How do you feel about this list? Like I talked about, there was a lot of debate, more than usual. I've been a part of, I think, 17 of these now. I don't remember ever this hard a time arriving at number one. Did we get it right?
Well, first of all, I want to say something that I want to really establish, because one thing I saw about the top ranked three. So as probably everybody knows now, our top ranked three are the three former members of the Shield. So Seth Rollins is 1, Roman Reigns is 2, Jon Moxley, a.k.a. Dean Ambrose, is 3. And I want to just say, I don't know about you guys, but across the board, a major thing I've been seeing over and over, understandably, is people going, well, clearly this was a marketing ploy, with the idea being we're going to sell this issue based on the fact that the Shield is still dominating the business, and it's a concept, and that's what made them do this. And I am here to say, I mean, I was there. I am telling you, you don't have to believe me. This was a coincidence. We really, truly did not plan it. We did not. We were sitting here doing the ranking. I think I might have been the first one that noticed.
I was going to say, I remember it was pretty late into the meeting where we had that realization. Yeah, and maybe it was you that brought it up.
And I said, oh my God, the three top guys are the Shield. And at that point, yes, we were super thrilled. We thought it was awesome and really kind of like very fitting. but we absolutely, what I'm trying to say is the tail did not wag the dog. We definitely,
it's also not that much of a stretch, right? I mean, it's not like, they're all absolutely legitimate top 3 guys.
Absolutely. And, I also want to say, I mean, I do think that, yes, I understand that there's a lot of people that will probably say it should have been Roman Reigns. And, it's a healthy debate. We even had that debate ourselves when you're talking about, who's the bigger name in the business, who is the more, who's wrestling more, who has better competition, all that kind of stuff. But I defy anyone to say that at least the argument cannot be made for Seth Rollins. Of course it can. And I think we made it really convincingly, especially going with our criteria and what we look at. It is absolutely a defensible position. And I also think it's taking a stand, which a lot of fans do agree with the idea that a world champion should be a fighting champion. He should be somebody front and center, making the appearances, like Seth said himself, making the towns, doing the meet and greets, being on the TV shows, doing the house shows. Like, there's an argument to be made for that. No one is going to say that Seth Rollins is the primary world champion of WWE and that Roman Reigns is the secondary world champion. But in so many metrics, Seth Rollins has earned this spot. That's what I'll say.
Yeah. Candace, I thought it was really interesting yesterday on Busted Open. There was a long discussion that I was listening to before we came on. And the host, Dave LaGreca, who's awesome, thanks for having us on, and Tommy Dreamer, Billy Ray, callers all giving, their predictions for number 1. I don't think anybody mentioned a Seth Rollins. There was, people thought MJF and Cody and Roman. Obviously, I don't remember anybody bringing up Seth. What does that say, that he kind of flew under the radar here?
Yeah, it's quite interesting because to that point, and I remember we were talking about this, you and I, Al, beforehand, in terms of the criteria and certain things that we base the list off of that we have for quite some time. And one of those things I keep referring back to is the influence factor. And I think people sometimes forget, one, that the list is based on kayfabe, 2, that there is a certain time period that we're looking at. And I assume from my observation that due to what people are seeing on television at the current moment and what they're seeing on social media at the current moment can kind of cloud their decision or their opinions about who should be in that top spot. So obviously, if you're looking at someone like Roman Reigns, who even though he wasn't in a ton of matches during that time period, his influence was palpable due to the bloodline storyline and due to just his presence and the way that things were panning out. And also, say, for instance, Cody Rhodes, he was injured for half of the period, but people respond to his promos, they respond to his social media, they respond to his charity work. And then you have Seth Rollins, who's just a workhorse. He's doing all of these shows. He's showing up on the morning shows and doing all of these things with his fashion choices. And he's just, working and on the grind. And it's really fascinating that so many people weren't thinking that perhaps, he would be number 1. But then when I checked Twitter, it was cool to see that there were a lot of people that actually loved that choice. I thought it was going to be the opposite, and we were going to have a backlash of, oh my God, why didn't you guys pick Roman again? But I saw quite the opposite, and a lot of people were loving the fact that Rollins was number 1, which I thought was really cool. And a lot of people liked that the Shield were in the top 3 position as well. And I saw a few folks saying, this is a marketing ploy, but I actually observed the quite opposite. There were a lot of references to the Shield memes, and even Seth Rollins himself referenced it yesterday, which was fantastic. Really cool. So, I feel as though it's that influence factor, and I don't know if that's due to the current age of social media and how much people are looking at what's happening outside of the ring, but I feel like that it's that influence. It's that influence that people, I think, still look at and feel as though that should be at the front and center of the decision-making that happens for this list.
Yeah, I just want to say, Al, if I could just say quickly on that, I think too, I saw a lot of what you're saying too. I think we benefited also from a little bit of this kind of Roman Reigns fatigue that I think is going on. And he's great, but I mean, we're seeing this. And I think part of it is there are people who were, I think, going, oh, thank God. thank God they didn't make it Roman Reigns. Enough with that guy. Like, okay, yes, he's the head of the table. Okay, could we change it up a little? I think that attitude actually helped us a little bit in the reception for Seth Rollins as number one.
Yeah, a little bit different than past years where I think it's aged pretty well. And that time between the end of the evaluation period and now, again, sort of helped because Roman's been especially inactive since a WrestleMania. And Seth has been out there night after night after night as that workhorse champion. So, yeah, and I think it's funny because a lot of that reaction that we saw in Busted Open and I think we saw on social media where people weren't even really thinking about Seth in the conversation, but then when he is revealed as number one, I think a lot of the reaction was like, oh, yeah, that's sort of what our meeting was like, when we decided on number one, where Seth came up early in the conversation and it was like, nah, it can't be Seth. And then we kind of went through everybody and we ended up back at Seth and it was like, yeah, of course.
Oh, totally. Because it was funny. Like last year, if you remember, last year it was all about, is it going to be Roman or Kenny Omega, right? If I have it right. It was Kenny Omega.
No, last year it was clearly Roman. The year before that.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, that's right. 2 years ago, we were thinking Roman Reigns, Kenny Omega. And it was like sort of this, like half and half. We were split down the middle. And I do think this time, I'm not going to lie, for people that debate those top couple of spots, I was one of the people who came into it in the debate and the meeting going like, well, I mean, it's kind of a foregone conclusion. Roman Reigns, he's the biggest star in the business. We were kind of saying, well, there's really no debate. Who's it going to be? I know he was last year, but then we started talking and I started listening and thinking, especially about the criteria and going by our criteria, which, it's not as much of a slam dunk, really. It's not. And it started making more sense to the point where, like I said in the meeting, and I'll say it now, I could completely have seen either one of those guys being number one. But I do think you can make a case for either one of those guys. So I that's why I didn't have a problem with it.
Yeah. Let's talk a bit about the criteria because it's always the point that people, I think we struggle to get people to understand. I saw the thing, Candace, that Cody's sister put out there. To me, it's almost crazy that people would think, and I love Cody. I think Cody is awesome. He's about my favorite thing in WWE these days. I think he checks all the boxes. They got something super special with him. I would have loved to have seen him win the world title at WrestleMania and earn the number one spot on our list. But come on, he didn't hold any titles during the evaluation period. He missed the first half of the evaluation period. He lost at WrestleMania. If you can make the case that he doesn't even belong in the top 10. I wouldn't make that case, and I think he does, and I think where he is, he is where he should be. But given that he is such a big name and is, I think we would all agree, doing some of the best work in all of wrestling, does it say something about our criteria and problems in our criteria that he isn't ranked higher? And another thing that sort of comes up this way is I was talking about this on another podcast I did last night. Seth Rollins is no better a wrestler than he was last year or the year before that. Seth has been great for a number of years now. Seth hasn't even been in the top 10 for a number of years. And why is that? Because he was a heel and he was losing all the time. And that worked against him. So, Candace, I mean, do you see problems in our criteria? And is there a way to address them?
I wouldn't say that there are problems with the criteria. I feel, and it has to go into the history of PWI and the criteria that it was, decades ago versus now. And for some days I've been thinking, well, as time goes on, should the criteria change? Is that something that needs to be in the conversation? And I don't mean change drastically, but are there certain things that need to be taken into consideration? Because from decade to decade, things change, people change, the industry changes. So should we start looking at things a little bit more in depth, like influence, like promo work, like where is that something that even should be a conversation? And, you know, in reference to that, it also brings up the question that Bully posed on Busted Open to me while we were there in terms of like the promotion. Are we, and it was a great question. And the way that I answered it when he asked someone like Josh Alexander from Impact, you know, if he fits the criteria, would he be eligible for number one? And I said, absolutely. We don't look at where a person, in terms of the promotion, it's not like we're saying WWE is number one, so anyone from WWE is going to be at the top spot every year. That's crazy. We can't do that. And also we're looking at things from a world view. So yes, we're bringing people into the conversation like Sonata and like different people who are coming from different promotions, whether it's WWE, AEW, and JPW. It's about fitting the criteria and the work that they're putting in. And that's where we have to really see, okay, if they're fitting the criteria, great. But now it becomes a question of, I think it's a great question, a great thing to think about. Should the criteria change in certain ways, and what would that look like as we're moving into, you know, 2024 and beyond, and looking at things like social media influence, promo work, in-ring work rate, and all of those things. You know, I would love to know your guys' thoughts because you've been with PWI longer than I have. So.
I mean, I think the criteria has evolved over the years. I mean, even in my time at the magazine, I've seen and been part of changes, you know, things like defining what activity is. And I don't think the influence a part of it was even there years ago. I remember that coming up. And that was, some of that was, I remember, related to John Cena, and John Cena being this transcendent wrestling star and feeling that like, well, that's got to count for something, right? Beyond how, you know, wins and losses. And, you know, Brian, it's the difficult part of trying to take a scientific approach to pro wrestling, where so much of it is not even this isn't baseball or football where you do your best, you put on your best year and you're going to be rewarded for it. It's going to show up in the stats. LA Knight is doing the same act he was doing a few years ago in the NWA. Vince McMahon didn't like that act, thought he would be better positioned as a manager, and so he was buried. Mm-hmm. And now Triple H seems to like him, and he's getting pushed. And you know, that affects how many matches you win, where you're slotted in the card, stuff like that. That is really not completely out of your hands, but a lot of it is out of your hands. Is going to control, you know. And that's a difficult thing because and this is, you know, this always comes up, you know, does that mean that the number 20 wrestler is better than the number 30 wrestler, who's better than the number 40 wrestler? And it's, you know, not really, right? So it's difficult. I mean, is there something that we could be doing to sort of polish this a little bit?
Well, I first of all, the list absolutely has changed, like you said, over the years, and there has been adaptation. I did, in this issue, my column, the way it was, looks at the original PWI 500. I may have talked about
have that on me. Yeah, I think it's
but there were a couple things I uncovered because I broke down the top 10 of that list. And what they had, first of all, 3 of the top 10, 3 were both Steiner brothers and Ricky the Dragon Steamboat. Now, Ricky the Dragon Steamboat had a terrible 1991. He was like a mid-card, nothing, forgotten act in the WWF. But he made the top 10 because he was one of the best workers in the whole business. He was just, and that's what got him there. And the Steiners made it, even though they had hardly any singles matches, because they were the best tag team. So they just like squeezed them in there. So we wouldn't do things like that today. So does that mean that there's not more room for change and improvement? No, I think there is. I mean, here's the thing. It's challenging sometimes to defend a lot of the criteria in a post-kayfabe world of fandom, especially when the people coming at you are people who are on social media and are pretty smartened up as far as wrestling fans go. It becomes hard to say, well, yes, it's all about, you know, we're looking at it in kayfabe. And of course, then you have people going, well, why? You know, so you have to then answer that question of why. You know, is it written in stone? Was it handed down from Mount Sinai? You know, there's got to be, you know, there's room. There's always room, I think, for adaptation. There's a competitor I won't mention, but there's another competitor magazine out there that does a similar kind of list, except they make it the least controversial, just the safest choices, the most obvious, and it creates a lot less contention. And people, it's just sort of like, who are the top whatever biggest stars in the business, ranked by how big of a star they are. And I'm not saying that's a route to go either, but it's certainly, I think there's a time where you got to sometimes ask a question. I'm being very transparent of, the thought of giving readers and fans what they want, instead of sometimes feeling like you're arguing with the readers and fans and telling them why this is better than what they think it should be. You know what I mean? So I understand that point of view. There have even been times where I've floated the idea, the controversial idea of maybe, and I know this blows up a lot of it, maybe there shouldn't be an evaluation period. Maybe it should be we're ranking the top 500 as of right now, as of the moment we're making the list. And maybe that would cause less of people going, well, why is Cody Rhodes number 10? Or why is this guy so high? And then we have to go, well, because if you look back to what he did in March and April and May, there would be less of that. It's just a thought. I guess all I'm saying at the end of the day is there's always room for improvement. There's always room for listening. And I don't think anything should be written in stone. And I'm always open to trying to improve it and always make it more representative and make it what fans would enjoy. So
the issue with not having an evaluation list is that, if you did a 500 every month, they would all look completely different, right? I mean, depending on who is in what storyline at any given time. And I think there's something to be said to judging a body of work over a year. Now, you could quibble with, and I think this came up yesterday, about the year, that our evaluation period, that it's halfway from one year to the halfway point of the other year. As I brought up, some of that is to distinguish it from the year-end awards. And there is going to be some overlap there. Otherwise, but I think these are all good points. The one thing that I do, I don't know if I say I'm troubled by, but I do think it is a growing issue to reckon with, as you said, Brian, in a post-kayfabe world, is relying so heavy on wins and losses, because again, they're largely out of the hands of the wrestler, right? I mean, they're not making that call, and inevitably, it gives babyfaces a huge advantage, right? So if you're Seth Rollins doing tremendous work over the last several years, and you can't even break into the top 10 for a number of years, or a guy, and maybe this isn't the best example, but people in wrestling really value and appreciate what The Miz is doing, right? For his job, for what his role on the roster, he plays it to perfection. It's never going to be rewarded in the 500 because the guy wins like a match a year, right?
And you have to.
How do you address that?
You have to take into account sometimes the nature of the business too, right? These are not things that they were thinking about 30 years ago, nor did they have to, because no fans were thinking about it. Okay. I can tell you I was there. Unless you were like some crazy newsletter reader, which were in a tiny minority of people, and those people generally didn't read PWI anyway. Fans didn't think that way, but so they could approach it like it's the Ring magazine and we're ranking 500 boxers and we're just looking at who won and who lost. I've talked about the heel bias of the 500. One thing I think I've noticed, at least when we have our meetings, maybe I'm wrong, and I'm glad to see it, is that there's less emphasis on house shows. And the reason I say that is because, again, you look at the nature of the business, and especially WWE, that it's a touring attraction, that it's like Ringling Brothers Circus. So they'll go on the road. They'll have the same match in 20, 30 towns, the same show. And so a guy will lose 20 matches in a row. You know what I mean? And it's like, oh my God, if we're only looking at wins and losses, that guy's dead in the water. Like, look at that guy. You may even have a guy he's the Intercontinental Champion or something, but he's a heel. So he's losing constantly by DQ or count out or whatever. And well, he's dead in the water, but you're going, yeah, but he's the Intercontinental Champion. He's heavily featured on TV. So, there are times like that where you do have to ask the questions. And I know, like I said, I'm glad I don't think, maybe I'm just deluded, that we don't seem to be talking as much about those house show tours as much as we used to.
Yeah. But
yeah.
I was going to say they mean something. I mean, we're very often we're there counting up matches and wins and losses, and it goes towards the tally.
I know.
Yeah.
I'm not saying it's perfect. Yes.
Candace,
Exactly.
One discussion that came up yesterday, busted open that again I think is interesting. It's valid. I think both Tommy and Bub in particular brought this up, is the perspective of the wrestler, right? And some of this often rubs me the wrong way. The whole notion of you don't know anything because you've never taken a bump in the ring, and I think that's dismissive, and I think that's wrong. That said, I think it is a valid point to say that a professional wrestler is going to have a different perspective, a different understanding than we have. In as much as you could look at wrestler X who's getting a huge push, but I think a wrestler could say, look, this is a lot of smoke and mirrors. He's really not that good. And the flip side, somebody who is better than what they're getting, a pro wrestler could recognize, say, this guy's fantastic. He just needs the opportunity. So how legitimate is that? Is that a perspective that needs to be part of the 500?
Oh, yeah. I had a long, really great conversation with a friend about just this yesterday in terms of media and bias and impartiality versus partiality. And I'm glad you brought this up because I was going to jump in real quick and state the fact that I personally would like to see at least one wrestler on the committee. And I know that Billy asked that question and we were like, yeah, we would take it into consideration. I think they would bring valid perspectives and it would be great for the list as a whole. But then I was thinking, and I didn't get to listen to the portion of Busted Open that you were listening to before we dropped in, but I heard bits and pieces about what was being discussed. And I thought, that would be, if there were to be more wrestlers, for instance, on the committee helping to decide this list, I think we would be wading into dangerous waters, because when you think about other fields, and it's hard to even differentiate because of what wrestling is versus, say, the NBA, MLB, NFL, et cetera, and how things are in terms of numbers and stats and lists and all of that stuff and awards that are given. It's different when it comes to the media in terms of giving opinion, because, say, for instance, in any of those other sports, you would have analysts, for example, that were athletes, that were in those leagues and are able to give their perspective. So when it comes to wrestling, yes, I understand that it would be, in my opinion, beneficial for a wrestler to jump on the committee. But and I don't know if this was implied on the show, but I was thinking about the fact of when it comes to media and wrestling, it's good to have people who never took a bump. Like, I would think it would be disingenuous to have a majority or all people in wrestling media who were wrestlers, because
that'd be biased in its own way. Yeah.
Exactly. That's like saying, okay, every media personnel or personality in the NBA would have had to have played in the NBA. It just, you need to, when it comes to journalism and media, you need to have people on the outside giving their perspective, getting the facts. That's just the ethics of journalism. You need to be able to report the facts, observe, talk to the sources, talk directly with the athletes, and then craft your stories, craft your interviews, et cetera, et cetera. Now, when you're getting into things like lists, it's not a popularity contest. That's not what it is. And I think that's where the disconnect lies. Like, I think people, and I'm not saying everyone thinks this way, but I think there are some people that think that we're literally sitting in a room going over this like it's a popularity contest. And that's not the case. If that were the case, then we wouldn't have criteria. We would just go along with, we probably wouldn't even have an evaluation period, just like you were stating, Brian, in terms of, should we scrap that? It would just be, okay, who do we like this year? What have they done, et cetera, et cetera? What are they doing on social media? All right, let's just slap them on at number 1, 2, 3, et cetera. There's a legacy and a history to this. There are criteria there for a reason. And to just state in a way where it's like, oh, we haven't taken a bump, so we don't understand. I don't like that. Like, I was getting
totally
passionate over, we're journalists for a reason. We're in the media for a reason. We love the sport for a reason. And we have to see fit in the way that we go about making lists of this nature and also reporting on what we're seeing in the ring and interviews that we do. And it can't be a popularity contest, or else it's just not real journalism. And we all come from a real journalistic background. So yes, we've never taken a bump before but it doesn't mean that our words aren't valid and our observations aren't valid. It just, I really did feel some type of way about that, because I'm like, where is this? Now we're getting into this conversation about, is our work valid because we've never taken bumps before? I was like, I don't know about that.
I agree. And again, it is one of my bigger pet peeves, and it happens in all industries. I mean, that would be to say that if you can't sing or play an instrument, you can't recognize what a good song is or anything like that. I mean, there's just no validity to it. That said, I think it's a perspective. I think it is a perspective worth considering. I think it could be enlightening on some topics. I mean, if it was, again, one of many perspectives that were brought to the table, and they're going to come with their own biases, and in some ways, more biases that we're going to have. This is maybe a little known secret, but for a number of years, there was at least one wrestler who was very instrumental in putting together the 500. I remember sitting down with him, and he and I would hammer out a lot of it. And it went fine, but yeah, I mean, it's fraught with its own issues, the biases. This guy doesn't get along with this guy. This guy wants to push this guy that he knows real well. And especially when you get deeper into the list and in the independents. And that came up even yesterday on a Busted Open, when Bully Ray was really zeroing in on quality of competition. Quality of opponents is one of our criteria. And I think that's where he really talked about what do they know about quality of wrestling. Mm-hmm. And again, it's sort of like a misunderstanding of what we're talking about. And it's not to say that this guy's a good worker and this guy's not a good worker. It's essentially where are they slotted in the card, right? And I brought up, it's a difference between getting a win over Drew McIntyre or getting a win over Akira Tozawa. And it's not to say that Akira Tozawa isn't a super, a talent in his own right.
He might be a better worker. Right. He might be a better worker than Drew McIntyre. I'm not saying he is, but very often the lower card guys are better workers than the main eventers. But I think sometimes when you're a little too close to it, and I'm going to go out on a wild limb here. I don't have a serious subscription, so I haven't heard the whole thing yet. I'm going to go out on a wild limb and say it was Bully Ray who said that. But, to say something like that, it basically challenges the validity of all kinds of journalism. It's what's the age-old thing. It's happened in sports from the beginning. Boxing writers, baseball, whatever sport you're writing about. Yes. Of course, there are people who are qualified to talk about it who never did it. I mean, that's what the independence of the press is all about, and of any kind of press in any field. That's what it's about. And so I think sometimes when you're too close to it, you sometimes lose that fan perspective, because that's when we say from a kayfabe perspective, right? When you break it down, all that really means, other than just we're treating it like a sport, is we're looking at it from the fans' perspective. If you're watching it at home and you're watching it on TV and you're taking it at face value, or you're going to the shows and you're taking it at face value, that's the perspective we're going for, not, the insider perspective. And that's important.
Yeah, I think that's everything. It's a really good point. I mean, at the end of the day, that's who we're writing this magazine for. And we know wrestlers and insiders read it as well. And, we're super proud of that. But yeah, at the end of the day, we're trying to give the viewpoint of the fan. And it's going to be different than the wrestler. Let's hit on some other issues. Well, again, I think we've dissected the top 10 to death. One thing that I do think is really interesting, and we've seen a lot more of this under Kevin's leadership at the magazine, the presence of women in the 500. There's more than ever this year. We've got Masha at number 15, the highest a woman has ranked this year. I've got to say, if I'm being totally honest, I've got mixed feelings about seeing so many women show up, and because I'm not necessarily familiar with all their work, I can't judge in individual cases. But Candace, and I don't know where you are on this, but what is the case to be made? Why there should be this many women, or should there be more women in the 500? I know there's even been a discussion over the years of whether we tear down that barrier altogether and do away with the women's list and just have one 500 with men and women.
Yeah, I've never thought harder about that question than I did yesterday, because several times I was specifically asked why. It wasn't so much that why Masha was higher on the list. It was more so, what is the criteria for women getting on the list? Because someone asked me, if Masha is on the list, why isn't Bianca on the list? And I was like, well, Bianca so far has only fought women. And as far as I understand, that's the reason for women being on this list. Their matches include those intergender matches. But then I thought, when I got more of those questions posed, I thought, well, okay, if we end up adding even more and more women on this list, what will happen to the women's list? Like, should that be completely eradicated? And what would that, I think it would make things even harder, because there's so many women that we look at, period, that go on the women's 250 as it begins with. And we, added more, because year after year it's been getting really difficult, because there's so many women who are extraordinary in the ring and doing fantastic work. Now, I don't have a problem seeing women on the 500. I think what might end up happening, though, is that if it comes to a point where that question keeps getting posed and there's more fans asking for that, should we start thinking about eradicating the women's 250? And what would that mean for the state of women's wrestling, for wrestling as a whole? I'm wondering if that even, I don't think it's crazy to think about, but I feel like if that were to happen, what would the chatter be? I think that would be major if we just had one list and then we had the tag team list and the year end, and that was it, and there was no women's 250. What would that look like? Because then we really have to start paring down and thinking, okay, we got to look at which women belong on this list. The criteria, does that change the criteria? Like, what are we going to see? And I think it's a great question. But I personally have no problem seeing women on the 500. I think it's fantastic. Masha's number 15. I've been following her work for quite some time, and I think she's deserving of it. Extraordinary work. As far as the indies go, it's really been, and it's not to poo-poo anyone else in the independents, but I feel like people like her and Billy Starks, Trisha Dora, it's just, they're doing fantastic. And they're having matches with all different types of people, no matter the gender, and the work rate is extraordinary. So I think it's deserving. I think those women do belong on the list.
Yeah, it kind of cuts both ways. And when we've sort of brought this question up, interestingly, some of the people who are most opposed to consolidating the lists are women wrestlers. I know I've heard it, because the thought is we like having our own thing. And the reality is, if we've got a 250 and a 500 and they're all getting combined, that's 250 people who are not going to be ranked, right? That's those people have to come out somewhere, or some women or some men. So it's a real issue. I guess the other question is, if we have a women's list, should the 500 be a men's list? Should it be the PWI men's 500?
Right? Because if we're saying, well, it's an interesting question. If we're saying we put women on there, as we traditionally have, because they are wrestling men, and we rank them accordingly, then wouldn't that open us up to saying, well, how come on the women's list? On the women's list should we now be thinking about the men who wrestle women a lot and put them on there?
And you want to do great.
Yeah, and for years, even now, we're still seeing debate about women's wrestling, and we're still seeing there are still people saying, well, I'm going to take a bathroom break during the women's match and all of this. And having a women's list is understandable because of the history of women in wrestling, period, and what women have had to go through in wrestling to get to where we are now currently, where there's so much good wrestling and so many wonderful women's wrestlers, that it's just hard. It's just hard to deny the cultural impact that women in wrestling are having to this day, no matter what promotion. But then, you're right, Brian. It does bring up that question of if we keep the women's list, and why aren't men on the list? But then to me, it goes back to the historical fact of wrestling has always been male dominated. So there are reasons why there is a women's 250. But if there's no more women's 250, then it's not like we're saying, oh, women's wrestling doesn't matter. But then it sucks, because you're thinking, well, a lot of the women that we have on this separate list, there's not going to be room for them. So we really have to be even more strict about, okay, which women deserve to be on this list and why. And then I think that would open a whole can of that probably make a lot of debate on social media, that I think we wouldn't even be talking much about who's number 1 to 3. We'd be talking about, well, why is this woman on this list, and what are they doing? I think that would just bring up so much debate. It would be insane, but that's TBD. We don't know. So,
well, the one thing I'll say is, whether it continues or not, it is a major indicator of how far women's wrestling has come, especially in the United States or in North America. I know in Japan it's been huge for a long time, but in the United States and Canada, the fact that a list like that even exists and is even a practical idea and done, because there was a time, and I know Al definitely would remember this like me, when we were kids watching, if somebody posted the idea of, hey, let's do a top 200 women's wrestlers,
where would you find them?
Who the hell's going to be on this list? Like, you would have to be the most in touch person in tune to the business to do a top 10. To do a top 10 would be like, oh, wow, that's a deep dive. You know what I mean? You'd have like, okay, Moolah, whoever Moolah's wrestling, Sensational Sherry, maybe Medusa, like, Debbie Combs, even when you had a list, there aren't a lot of readers that would care or want to look at it, because women's wrestling was so minimized and was such a sideshow and was such an afterthought. Just the fact that the list exists now and that it's being able to be taken that seriously is a huge deal. And I think we should never forget that. It has come so far.
Yeah, I think, and I'm happy to see the list grow and grow. It began, I think, as the female 50, and now we're up to 250. I wonder if there'll be a 500 one year. I do think allowing women to be ranked on both lists is fraught with all kinds of issues, because you could also argue that it gives some women who are willing to work with men kind of an unfair advantage against other women who don't choose to, or for whatever reason don't. You could be on both lists, and the women who work with men, it even for the criteria, it gets tricky. So you're looking at let's say Amasha, are we only evaluating her matches with men, and then and she's a different case, but I think there are other women in the list where this gets to be more of an issue. And if that's the case, did they even have enough of them of intergender matches to meet the activity standards? Are we disqualifying all their accomplishments in matches with other women? It's tricky. I'm not saying I've got the answer to any of it, but I do think it's tricky. I for one am I support keeping a women's list for sure, and not completely consolidating the two. I still think we need to figure out how much overlap there can be. On a similar topic, and I had somebody ask me about this yesterday, and this is nothing we've dealt with for a long time, is tag team wrestlers. Like you brought up Rick and Scott Steiner being in the top 10 years ago. And there have always been, and maybe in some ways now more than in many years, we had the tag teams headline WrestleMania. These are very, very much top guys in the business. But, I'm not sure where Jay and Jimmy Uso are on the list. I'd have to pull it up, or the FTR guys. So
I don't think the Usos are on at all. Or oh no,
I don't think Sami Zayn and Kevin Owens are. and
because
our
I think the Usos were included on when we had the section saying like, "Hey, here's why some of your favorites didn't make the list." Like, I don't think they're on there.
Yeah, and again,
I don't think so either.
I
saw
for
that
years,
argument.
like it was always like, does Nick Jackson go first, or does Matt Jackson go first? And inevitably they'd be right next to each other. So that's another thing. I'm happy to have the tag team list to break some of that apart and recognize that it really is its own thing, right? And happy to give them their own universe.
Right.
One other thing on this topic, international wrestling. It's funny, again, when people go down there, they give their top 10 and they're always, doing their predicting, and then they hear the top 10, and then you come to Okada or you come to a Vikingo, and people are like, huh? What? And it's and I heard people ask, oh, are you just doing that to placate, international fans, that kind of thing? What to the Brian? I'll throw it to you. And this is tough. I mean, I think if we're being 100% honest, we are not going to be able to do as thorough as comprehensive an analysis of the wrestling scene in South Africa as we are in the U.S., or Mexico or Japan. Does it? What is our responsibility to include international wrestlers, and are we getting it right?
I think we are getting it right because look, I know sometimes people get confused by that. I think Vikingo's number 5, and people are going, "Oh my God, he's above Cody. He's above this person. He's above that." Here's the thing: yes, Pro Wrestling Illustrated is an American magazine. It's published in the United States. It's catering to readers in English-speaking countries in the West. It is always going to have to be centered in that way. Nothing wrong with that. If you pick up, there are wrestling magazines that existed in other countries, Japan. But one thing that I know that the magazines always strive to do is it engages with the prominent stuff going on internationally, in so much as it touches and intersects with the American wrestling perspective. So like, no, it never was big about covering wrestling in Europe or Africa, even historically, because there was almost no awareness of that for the American pro wrestling fan. I mean, that's the reality. But when you talk about things like Japan or Mexico, those are international genres that American fans, especially the more hardcore fans, they do have an awareness of. It does touch their world and touch their fandom. And there's plenty of American fans that subscribe to NJPW or their streaming service and things like that. So, I mean, like, I think when you look at it at that perspective, we're absolutely getting it right. Because again, I mean, look, if there was a wrestling magazine in Mexico that was covering, and I know there is, I shouldn't say that, but there is, but that's covering wrestling there, Vikingo's probably their number 1. You know what I mean? Because that's their perspective. I think we got it right in the sense that when it's an American, when it's a kayfabe point of view, again, this is a guy, he's been the AAA mega champion. That's their equivalent of a world champion for a long time. And now he's got his work visa situation straightened out. So he's wrestling internationally. He's been all over the United States in the past year. That gets him in the top 10. I mean, he's a major international figure and a world champion and a dominant one at that for a long time. So, I mean, that's again, but it's from an American perspective, but that doesn't mean that everybody on there needs to be WWE, AEW, or prominent wrestling American scene. So yeah, I think we did get it right.
Yeah. And I'll point out the biggest oversight that I think omission, I should say, that I'm aware of is we left Tetsuya Naito off the list. And I know Kevin took to Twitter X yesterday. I think he joked that he was booking the first plane to Japan to apologize in person. We're not going to try to justify it. He should have been on the list. I think in some drafts of the list, he was there. Inevitably, this is always, kind of a lot of moving pieces, and some guys get put to the side to be put back in later. And sometimes, that doesn't happen. So apologies to Naito, who absolutely belongs somewhere in the 500 for sure. Candace, another thing that I think is really hard to sort of like nail down, how do you do this right, is independence, right? Because there are hundreds, if not thousands, all over the country. And, after the list comes out, and I know you heard from some of them, inevitably you get a lot of indie workers. Why was I left off? Why was this guy left off? This guy is the biggest thing in my region. How is he not on your radar? It's tough, right? I mean, and the reality is, even though the territory system is gone in big picture, there really are territories all over the country and all over the world, little groups, and in your little slice of the United States, you might have a guy who is a big deal who we may not be aware of. And I think we do our best with our contributors in trying to keep tabs on what the scene is in different parts of the country. I think the reality is that PWI is based in the Northeast. Most of the three of us, I think, are all in the Northeast. A lot of the teams in the Northeast. Does it lead to some biases where maybe there's more of an awareness about the independent scene in the Northeast? What's your take on how we are handling the representation of the independents on the list?
Well, one thing that I learned yesterday, which I didn't catch me off guard, but I was actually cracking up at it, is that there are some workers who think that we know literally every independent worker that is out there on the planet. And I was like, exactly. I was like, there is no way that all of us on this staff is able to go to every independent show. And even, yes, with social media out there combing, I'm thinking, it would be great if we could do that on like an A&R perspective, but we just, there's just no way. And that's just to the testament of how many workers there are out there. So whenever I get this question posed now, I just tell them, yes, there is an application that you, as far as I understand, unless it's changed, there's an application that you can put your bid in, because for some of us, we might not know who you are. And that's not to say that you're horrible. It's just to say that there's so many independent workers out there now. There's so many independent promotions. Take some initiative, actually, like, show us your stuff. Like, we are open to that, because we very well could be missing someone who we think will be a great candidate on the list. And don't try to, don't show off your skills. Let us know what's happening. Let us know where you're having shows. If we're able to go out, we can go out. And it's not, it's something that I love doing, is going out to these indie shows and seeing people that I've even heard of but have never seen in the ring. Like recently I saw Love Doug, and I vaguely heard of him before, but that was just one example of someone that I was like, okay, great. Like, this is someone that I actually enjoy, and I love being able to do that. And I think if you're pushing yourself out there in different ways and letting us know that you're existing and you're working, it's great, because there's just no literal way we know everyone, and that's all over the world. There are independent workers everywhere across the globe. Like, I just recently read about, I think it was in Vietnam, a Vietnamese promotion that's doing well, and I'm like, it's just impossible. So the best thing to do is to let us know you're alive, and then I get the questions too of what can I do. Yeah, exactly. It's part of the job. And then I also got a question too of what do I have to do to make it on the list? And I'm just like, it's that criteria. Like, before I would just say, just work hard, let us know you exist, but look at the criteria, because the criteria is there for a reason. And the more that you're working, it helps. The more that you're putting yourself out there, it helps. The more that you're advocating for yourself, definitely helps. But once again, the list is, there's 500 people eligible. It gets hard. It gets hard because there's way more than 500 people in the world that are in wrestling, period. So, yeah. Yeah,
I think because of social media, in some ways, it's obviously become easier to self-promote and get yourself out there. But because of that, I think maybe some wrestlers kind of forget about kind of like the old-fashioned sort of elbow grease, reach out to us. Back in the day, around this time of year, we'd be flooded with VHS tapes and 8x10s in the PWI offices. And there is something to be said for reaching out. It's like if you're trying to land a job, right? I mean, you could just like dump your resume on some website, or you could pick up the phone or send that email or something and make sure you're connecting with the people. So yeah, I think, but again, 500, it's tough. Let's talk about number 500. I don't think anybody's talked about it. I haven't seen it discussed anywhere. I can't remember the last time a WWE guy was number 500, and that is the case this year. Andre Chase from NXT, the leader of Chase U. Brian, are you a fan, or are you happy to see him on the list?
Well, I mean, as somebody who, I cover all the shows on a daily basis all the time, and there's even times, and Andre Chase is not one of these people, where even I'll look sometimes at NXT and I'll go, is this a real person? I'll look at the result, and I don't mean to dismiss anybody. So, I mean, anybody that distinguishes themselves there, I think it's a good sign. I mean, I think NXT is tough because everybody there is trying to, at the same time, learn. And also, while you're learning, you're also trying to get over. So it's not like it's just a wrestling school. You're actually trying to get TV ratings and things. So, I mean, anybody from NXT that even makes the list at all, I think is an accomplishment. So I'm not going to knock, the 500.
Yeah, he was happy to be on it, and he brought up an interesting point. Him both number 1 and number 500 being under contract. It's an opportunity to have the first ever number 1 versus 500 match, which would be fun. But this kind of reminds me of a conversation that came up yesterday on Bust Open. Tommy Dreamer really expected to be on this list, and I kind of felt bad that he wasn't. A Bully is on the list, but this is something that we struggle with all the time, and I always talk about sort of like the honky tonk man effect or something, and the reality that if you go by the criteria, there were probably into like the 2000s, you could have made an argument for the honky tonk man being consistently ranked in that he kept busy, he worked a whole lot, and if he was going to be on the show, there was a good chance he was winning, right? And to some extent, and no disrespect to Tommy Dreamer, who is now the digital media champion, having won it at Victory Road, and I was at that show, and it was really cool seeing him win that title in front of a hometown crowd. But it's like what's our responsibility to also, this is something that's coming up in other circles in the world of politics, clear the way for a new generation, right? I mean, yes, Tommy Dreamer can still get booked a whole lot, and if he's going to get booked, there's a good chance that if you pay him and you hire him to be on your show, he's going to win. Does that mean he should make the list?
Well, it kind of harkens back to something that used to happen a lot in the early years of the 500. I'm especially thinking like back in the 90s. The indie scene back then was very different from what it is now. Like there's much more today of like indie specialists, people that are indie wrestlers. That's what they are. They wrestle on the independent scene and they book themselves and all this. Back then, like the indies were filled, I feel like much more than today, with guys who used to be in the WWF or maybe WCW, guys that used to be at WrestleMania and SummerSlam, and now they're wrestling in high school gyms and stuff. So and they would, like Al said, they would usually win and they would get booked constantly on these little shows. So then like you'd open up, oh, it's the PWI 500, in 1996, and you're seeing people on there like Paul Orndorff, the honky tonk man, Tony Atlas, guys where you're looking at it and going like, he's still wrestling? That guy's still around? What? Like one thing I mentioned was on the 1991 list, Bobo Brazil and the Sheik were on there, for crying out loud. Yeah. I'd venture to say like 90% of wrestling fans didn't even realize they were still wrestling in 1991. So like, I think Tommy probably is thinking back to those days because Tommy is a big wrestling fan. He grew up a fan. He used to, he's reading the magazines and things. So to him, it's a big deal and it means a lot. But like you said, Al, the landscape is a little bit different now.
Yeah, and I feel for him. It's like I get it. It's being on the list is really cool. But something's got to give at some point. So you're not going to get everybody on. anything else that we wanted to touch on? Again, it's so kind of overwhelming. Why don't I quickly go through a lot of talk about the top 10. Let's talk about 11 through 20. So 11 was Sonata, 12 Claudio Castagnoli, 13 Carmelo Hayes, 14 Samoa Joe, 15 Masha, 16 Bryan Danielson, 17 Will Ospreay, 18 Alexander Hammerstone, 19 Bobby Lashley, and 20 Trey Miguel. Interesting that only one WWE main roster guy in that second group of 10. And I think it speaks to WWE being really kind of like top heavy with a few guys, and then there's a big drop to that next level.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah,
Candace,
Brian. Either of you.
Well, I was going to say, I think that we even had that year. Was it? I know I get the years mixed up, but I think it was the Kenny Omega year where we were all marveling and going like, wow, I don't think I can remember a time where there were this few WWE people near the top. It just almost, I think like the top 10, wasn't it like less than half were WWE or something? And I think it's not quite that way as it was a couple of years ago, but it's definitely, it's more spread out these days in the business. Like I think in years past, let me put it this way. In years past, when you had whoever was number 2, right? Let's say it was Impact for a long time. You really had to struggle and strive to like try to lift some of these people up so that it wouldn't just be all the WWE guys. Like you had, okay, well, let's give recognition. We got Ring of Honor, we got, Impact. Whereas now you don't really need to do that. I mean, you don't need to work hard to de-emphasize WWE or make it look like the whole business isn't WWE, because it isn't. Like it feels more legit, like it is more spread out, it is more organic, where even the average wrestling fan has an awareness that it's not just WWE, that there's a lot of wrestling out there, and it's healthy. It's a healthy reflection of what's going on in the business.
Yeah, and I think it's cool that the 500 is this kind of snapshot of the wrestling business, and one of the things that jumps out at me is that there's so much talent in AEW, right? I mean, just names. And I think if you probably go into the next 10, you'll have another. I mean, let me just quickly scan 21 through 30. Chris Jericho, Kenny Omega, Adam Page. These are top guys in AEW. And there's so much over there. And WWE, it really is a different approach where you've got a few guys who are clearly your top guys, and then a big drop to that next level. And that can become an issue with WWE sometimes. That's why you see Nakamura, headlining against Seth Rollins, because there is this kind of like dearth of top guy challengers. Anyhow, I head on over to PWI-online.com. We can't do justice here in an hour to the whole list, but check it out. Again, dig in, tons of analysis. Biggest thing we do every year, and super proud of it. Proud to be a part of it for another year. Before we run, guys, in some ways I feel like I'm burying the lead a little bit here in that WWE is no longer controlled by the McMahons. As of a couple of days ago, the merger became official. WWE now part of the TKO umbrella, essentially a merger with UFC, and it is now official. Vince McMahon is back in a position of power officially. Talk of some downsizing coming relatively soon, maybe by the time you're listening to this, and some pretty significant downsizing at WWE. I imagine a lot of that's going to be on the administrative office side, but I imagine some talent cuts are coming as well. Candace, how do you feel about this whole thing? Is this potentially good news? Is this bad news? Is the reality that for most fans, not much is going to change?
Yeah, I think when it comes to the cuts, it's sad and it's unfortunate. However, usually when a merger takes place, cuts happen. So I personally am not surprised to hear of this news, and it just seems like it was inevitably going to happen. And I just wish everyone luck, because after reading that note that was posed on social media from Nick Khan about the workers working from home and all that stuff as they make their decisions. It hurts. So I'm hoping for all the best for all of them. In terms of the merger itself, I am particularly excited. You can't please everyone. So I know with this merger, there's going to be decisions made that fans are not going to be happy about, and potentially, some wrestlers might not be happy about. But I've been following the news very heavily. I hear of some talks about like a mega TKO weekend, which I think is brilliant, because one of the first things that I thought about when, having WWE and UFC coming together, what's going to happen with the PLEs on the WWE side and then the UFC, their fights that they have on Saturday. So the buzz that I'm hearing is that they're just going to have these mega weekends where they have UFC fights on Saturday, the PLEs go on Sunday, and then they have some really cool things happening on Friday. So I'm excited about that. I think it's great. I think there's going to be a lot of really cool things that we're going to start seeing in terms of WWE filtering into the mainstream. I mean, for instance, I'm seeing a lot of activity with New York Fashion Week. We have wrestlers like, I believe, Maxine Dupree walked on the runway. We saw Triple H in the audience, like rooting for her. I think we're going to see more things like that, which is really cool. And I feel like we're definitely jumping into a new era where we're going to have some dream matches. We're going to see more movie appearances. We're going to see things with fashion, things with television. I'm all for it. So as far as the creative decisions go, I hear Vince is still working in the back. So it is what it is. But I'm really excited for the future. I think that we're going to see some really cool things, and it's only going to get bigger for them as they go off into this new era merged with UFC. So I like it. I like it.
I'm, I don't even know if cautiously optimistic is the word. But I think there's all kinds of different manifestations that we haven't even really thought about it on. Some of it has been discussed already. The potential for UFC fighters on kind of the downside of their career to maybe get new life in WWE. I think like you've got to really pick and choose who those guys are, and they'd have, look, I mean, if you'd have an opportunity to put Conor McGregor at WrestleMania, you do it. I don't know how much somebody else, a Daniel Cormier or a Michael Bisping or something like that, I don't know how much that would mean. So I don't know that there are that many. I think the reality is, by and large, WWE stars are bigger stars than UFC stars. And you can't do that crossover in the other direction. Just remember CM Punk. I mean, are there Brock Lesnar? I mean, does this maybe open the door for Brock or Ronda? I think those doors were always open to begin with. I think that there is something of a learning curve here about how they're going to work together. I mean, there was some statement put out by some TKO exec saying, our goal is for every WWE fan to be a UFC fan and every UFC fan to be a WWE fan. And then Dana White comes out the next day and he says, that's ridiculous. And he really shut it down. And I think UFC is a little cautious of being affiliated too closely with that fake wrestling stuff. Right, Brian?
Well, it's like I said something how, one thing, I have so many thoughts on this. I don't know where to begin. I know we've been talking a long time, but it's like one of my knee-jerk reactions was, it's so interesting to me how for 40 years we've heard over and over and over again, this is not sports, this is entertainment. This is entertainment. We're competing with entertainment. And now all they're talking about with WWE is combat sports. We're in the combat sports space. It's combat sports. Like, it's such a weird marketing 180. And yeah, you know what? This is like if the Harlem Globetrotters merged with the NBA.
Yeah.
And people are like, oh, yes, we're all basketball players. It's weird. And I think that Dana White, I get the sense, which I didn't think was going to happen, because I always thought him and Vince were like, I thought he was like Vince was like his Obi-Wan Kenobi or something. But I get the sense that he is kind of chafing against this a little bit. I don't know if he's super thrilled. He's definitely an alpha guy the way Vince is. And I don't know how thrilled he is about now we're sharing, now I'm buddies with like you said, the fake wrestlers. And I don't know. I think there's definitely probably more enthusiasm on the Vince side of things. But I see people that are because I saw something yesterday where that I guess it's true that Vince somehow now has some type of veto power over UFC decisions because of his position in TKO. Now, if I'm Dana White, there's a few holes in the walls in my house when I read something like that after that. So, I mean, I think some people are being somewhat dense on this when I see people on social media that are like, well, I don't see a difference. Vince is still going to be in charge. And I'm like, no, it's not at all. Like, you have, yes, he has power. Yes, he's still running WWE. Yes. And the same way Dana White is running their UFC, but he's not the owner. He's the general manager now. He has a boss. He has a boss for the first time since his dad. He has somebody that he has to answer to. He has somebody that's going to be doing his performance reviews. That's something that is astronomically different. And I have to say, I can't not say this. I know, Candace, you touched on it already, but this is important to me because I worked there and I was in this position. I do remember those days where I think it was 2001 or 2, where it was the combination of the failure of the XFL and the failure of the restaurant in Times Square at the same time. It was something like a $40 million loss. And it was like, we called it like Black Friday or whatever day of the week it was, because they literally, we didn't have Zoom back then. We didn't have, remote work, but there was over the loudspeaker, everybody stay at your desk, over the PA, sit at your desk, do not leave your work area until we give you the all clear. And it was because they were coming around with the hand trucks and the boxes and the guys from facilities. And they did not want people going, they didn't want people going postal, and you're sitting there at your desk going like, we're looking at each other like, is it you? Is it me? What's happening? And I have to say, my director, I don't want to go too far into the weeds on this, was a beautiful person who saved almost all of our jobs. He found a way to do it in our department. The other departments were not as lucky. So a day like today, I'm saying today, the day we're recording this, is a nightmare for real people who have real jobs and families. I'm sorry.
No, yeah, I'm sure. Like it brings back some memories. Yeah,
and it happens in a week when you've got $29 million in exec bonuses that went out.
Yeah,
and they're talking about we need to shave off $50 to $100 million to save money with WWE. That was the number given out, and they just gave out $29 million in bonuses. Like maybe if you didn't give Nick Khan $12 million and Kevin Dunn $7 million, Triple H $5 million. Maybe if you didn't do that, maybe save some of those jobs or something. It's just, it takes a lot of a nerve. And then the guy sending the email out is Nick Khan, the guy that got the $15 million bonus. I mean, I understand the need for some of it because you got redundancies on the corporate side. I get it. There's departments like accounting that are hit hard, HR, travel, consumer products and things where there's going to be a lot of overlap between the companies. I'm not living in a fantasy world. I know that. But I also certainly know that there is a more humane way to go about it than the way they're going about it. So it has to be said.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
I agree.
Yeah.
And as much, I'm sorry you had to go through that part.
I'm sorry, guys. That was, I got a little
it's real. It's hard to fathom for a lot of people that have never been in that position. But as much as I'm excited about this becoming a reality in terms of the merger and the possibilities, I'm heartbroken for a lot of people that are going to lose their jobs, especially in this economic state that this country is in. So I really pray that everyone just gets through it, the best that they can. But it takes time, and it sucks. It really does.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's going to be good and there's going to be bad. I hope the good outweighs the bad. I don't know how much I believe that's going to happen. And just from the fans' perspective, and at the end of the day, I mean that is, I think, as a wrestling magazine, as we were talking about earlier, trying to give the perspective of fans, that is the priority. I do worry. I mean, do we move into $80 WWE pay-per-views every month, and all kinds of different ways of fleecing their fans? On the flip side, I mean, are there potential benefits for WWE? I suppose. I mean, I don't know that I can pinpoint them that easily. I'm a UFC fan too, so but when I see UFC's business model, and look, UFC fleeces its fans. There's no two ways about it. I still haven't gone to a UFC show in Madison Square Garden since they've been legalized years ago, because the buy-in price just to get through the door is $300 or something like that.
What?
Yeah, I mean it's absurd how much
that's become a problem
fans.
Across the board in sports and entertainment. As a parent, I hate it because I want my kids to have these experiences that I had, and I'm like, last summer, this season, I wanted to take my kids to a Yankee game. My son's never been; he's 6 years old. He's never been to a ball game, and I was like, maybe not. Maybe I'll wait till I hit the lotto or something. It's insane.
And WWE, to their credit, are a lot more reasonably priced. You could still go to a WWE show if you don't mind sitting in the nosebleeds for, $35-$40.
Or depending on the venue, like I went to White Plains, Westchester County Civic Center, very affordable seats on the floor, it wasn't the Garden. So what?
Yeah, it's doable. And UFC, some shows, I mean, a Garden show is going to be more than anywhere else. But and now pay-per-views, I think they're up to $80 on top of what you've got to pay to subscribe to ESPN. And I think, Nick Khan and Vince McMahon see that, and they just start kind of watering at the mouth like, oh, we'd love that. And I get it. I mean, they're trying to make money, but I don't know if it's what's best for fans. So, we'll see. We'll be monitoring it for sure as time goes on here. All right, let's wrap this up, guys. Thanks so much. Candace, you want to give any plugs, social, where can people find you and your work? I know you're a regular contributor to Busted Open as well.
Yeah, absolutely. You can follow me on Twitter at Candace Cordelia. You can also follow me on Instagram, that girl Candace 16. There's always fun things coming out. And as WrestleMania, as we're talking about the list and all these things, WrestleMania will be right around the corner. I'm sure between now and then there's going to be so much in store in terms of exclusive content. So just keep a watch out, and subscribe. Go to PWI-online.com.
Are you going to Grand Slam?
You know what? I don't think I am this year. I went last year and I loved it. This year, it pains me to say I don't think I'm as excited about. I think
Candace, they need you there. They got a lot of empty seats. You got to go. You got, they need your help. 7,000 tickets distributed, I think.
Yeah. I mean, that's unbelievable.
I was going to the Philly AEW show, but it hurts me to say because I feel like there's such from last year to this year in terms of just my enthusiasm. I don't know. There are certain things I love of what they're doing, but for Grand Slam, I don't know.
That first show was like a WrestleMania. I was there.
Omega.
Awesome.
It was. I was there with my son. It was a special night. I think it was the biggest crowd in New York City for non-WWE wrestling since, I believe, the 1950s. It was a huge deal. Yeah, but it doesn't feel that way. You're right.
No. I heard it was in that neighborhood of 6,000 seats sold so far, and I mean, it speaks to AEW. So we could talk another hour about AEW, but it's crazy because you think about that.
I've heard
the paradox of Wembley Stadium and Grand Slam. I mean, is this company doing well or not?
There were crowd shots from their most recent TV tapings, which were astonishing. It just looked like it was like the middle of the afternoon when people are starting to trickle in, and
I was shocked. Exactly.
I heard they're doing 2-for-1s for no joke. I heard they're starting to do 2-for-1s for Grand Slam to try to help fill it up. Yeah.
Whoa.
Wild. Yeah. And Brian, where can people follow you, your work, number of books out available now and more on the way?
Yes. So Blood and Fire, my biography of the Sheik, is still available. It's been out for over a year now, so it's out there. And I know a lot of people have it. But for those that don't, you can get it on Amazon or Barnes & Noble or wherever you find books. And my newest book, which is in the works, Irresistible Force, The Life and Times of Gorilla Monsoon, hard at work. I just talked to Gorilla's daughter this week, Valerie. She's a total sweetheart. It's been so helpful. I really am excited about writing this book. And I think a lot of people are going to love it. And there's my podcast, Shut Up and Wrestle, SUAWpod.com, or get it wherever you get podcasts. It is an old school wrestling podcast, and I have different guests every week. I just did a Terry Funk tribute not long ago. And it's if you're an old school wrestling fan, it's good conversation. You'll enjoy it.
Absolutely. All right, guys. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Talking about the 500 is always fun. We'll be doing it again in a year from now. And Brian, I'm sure we'll be talking before that. Thanks so much, guys. And we'll see everybody soon.